CEO opened an old envelope from him. She called him in tears without saying a word. They snickered as she walked past his desk. Patricia Holt, VP of Strategic Partnerships at Creston Capital, whispered to her assistant Bridget Cole, loud enough for the entire bullpen to hear. Let's see how the janitor explains himself when the CEO asks why her conference room smells like pine sol. Bridget laughed behind her hand. 3 analysts pretended to study their screens. The security guard at the reception desk stared at his shoes. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway of Suite 1400, holding a mop bucket and a stack of fresh hand towels, wearing the navy blue uniform that had his name stitched above the pocket in white thread. He had cleaned this floor every Tuesday and Thursday for 11 months. He knew where the spare key was kept. He knew that Patricia Holt always left her expensive heels at the corner of her desk when she thought no one was watching. He knew that the conference room she'd just made a joke about was where the company had lost 3 major deals in a row, and that whoever cleaned it next would be walking into a room still heavy with failure. He also knew that 6 months ago, he had submitted a 14-page proposal to Creston Capital through their anonymous submission portal. The proposal had been titled, Restructuring the Meridian Pipeline, a 3-stage recovery model for distressed mid-market holdings. He had not put his name on it. What Patricia Holt didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man they were laughing at had once sat in the CEO's chair of a company 3 times the size of Creston Capital. What they didn't know was that the anonymous proposal sitting in the CEO's inbox had already been flagged by 2 senior advisors as the most sophisticated restructuring analysis we've received in 4 years. What they couldn't have known was that by Thursday, Patricia Holt would be standing in front of Human Resources explaining her behavior. And by Friday, the CEO of Creston Capital would be sitting in her office, trying not to cry. But that was later. Right now, Marcus just set down the mop bucket, straightened his shoulders, and got to work. He had been up since 5. Not because of the job, his shift didn't start until 8, but because of Noah. His son was 7 years old and had recently developed the habit of waking before sunrise and appearing at Marcus's bedside like a small, serious ghost, holding a book he wanted read to him. This morning it had been a library copy of the story of Ferdinand, the bull who didn't want to fight and just wanted to sit under a tree and smell the flowers. Why didn't Ferdinand just fight? Noah had asked when it was over. Because he knew something the other bulls didn't, Marcus said. What did he know? That having the strength to fight and choosing not to, that's the real power. Noah had considered this for a long time while eating his cereal. Then he said, "Dad, do you know something that other people don't?" Marcus had looked at his son, the boy's hair still pressed flat on one side from sleep, wearing the dinosaur pajamas he'd grown 2 inches out of but refused to give up, and said, "I know you're going to be more than I ever was. That's enough for now." He had said it quietly. He meant every word. After Noah left for school with Mrs. Patterson from downstairs watching him, Marcus made coffee in the small kitchen of their 2-bedroom apartment in Glendale. The apartment was clean and carefully kept. 1 framed photograph of Noah's mother on the bookshelf. She had died when Noah was 3. And 2 bookshelves that covered an entire wall, organized by subject. Business, history, philosophy, architecture, 3 shelves of novels, a row of bound notebooks Marcus had filled with notes in a handwriting so small it looked like another language. He had a degree from Wharton. He had an MBA from Columbia. He had run a company called Aldrin Group for 9 years, built it from a regional consulting firm to a national operation. And then, in the span of 1 bad quarter and 1 catastrophic decision made by a board he'd trusted, watched it dissolve into receivership. He hadn't filed for bankruptcy. He'd paid back every creditor he could reach. He'd liquidated everything that wasn't Noah's college fund. And then he'd taken the only job he could find that started immediately, paid cash every week, and asked no questions about gaps in employment history. He'd been cleaning office buildings for 14 months. He had told no one. Creston Capital occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Los Angeles. Marcus had learned the rhythms of the place, the way you learn the rhythms of a house you've lived in long enough. He knew which executives arrived early and which ones came in red-eyed at 11. He knew that the overnight cleaning crew left the good coffee filters in the wrong cabinet, and that the reception desk kept a spare phone charger in the 3rd drawer. He also knew about the CEO. Her name was Claire Donovan. She had built Creston Capital from a 2-person operation to a firm managing over $1 billion in assets. She arrived at 7:45 every morning, stayed past 8 most nights, and ate lunch at her desk while reading financial statements. She was 44 years old, had short dark hair she kept tucked behind her ears, and wore reading glasses she was always losing and always finding on top of her own head. He had never spoken to her. He had once held the elevator for her. She had said, "Thank you," and then looked at him. Really looked. Not the glancing past that most people did with maintenance staff, and added, "You're here every Tuesday and Thursday, aren't you? The 15th floor always looks better after you've been through." Marcus had said, "I try to be thorough." She had nodded once, looked like she might say something else, and then the elevator had arrived and she was gone. He had thought about that exchange more than he wanted to admit. The proposal had started as a habit. After Noah was asleep, Marcus worked. He always had. It was the one part of his old life he hadn't put in a drawer. The thinking, the analyzing, the pulling apart of a company's structure to see where it was bleeding. He did it the way other people did crossword puzzles. Because his brain didn't know how to stop. Creston Capital had been in the news. 3 failed acquisitions in 18 months. A restructuring specialist they'd brought in who had made things worse. The firm wasn't in trouble yet, but it was the kind of not in trouble that becomes trouble faster than you expect. He had spent 3 weeks on the proposal. He wrote it the way he used to write them when he had a staff and an office and a title, rigorously, comprehensively, with no wasted words. He included a recovery timeline, a capital reallocation strategy, a 30-page appendix of comparable restructuring cases. He submitted it through the anonymous tip portal on Creston's website, because there was one, and because he did not want his name attached to a document that the janitor from the 15th floor had written. Then he went back to work on Tuesday and Thursday. He mopped. He restocked the towels. He held the elevator. He heard nothing. Patricia Holt had been with Creston Capital for 6 years and had developed, over that time, a talent for identifying who mattered and who did not. She was 41. She wore suits that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. She spoke to the cleaning staff the way she spoke to furniture, around them, not at them, and had once complained to building management that the night crew had left a streaky residue on the marble floor outside her office. She had not mentioned this to the cleaning crew directly. That would have required acknowledging they existed. Her assistant, Bridget Cole, was 30 and still learning which behaviors to model. Patricia had learned of the anonymous proposal through her assistant, who had overheard 2 senior advisors discussing it in the break room. She had requested a copy through internal channels, read the executive summary, and told her colleague James Rafferty, "Whoever wrote this clearly has no idea how our internal systems actually operate." Interesting theory. Completely impractical. James Rafferty had nodded without reading it. Patricia had then filed it in the same mental folder she kept for things that challenged assumptions she preferred not to examine. It was Bridget who saw him first. She had stayed late on a Wednesday, unusual for her, and was waiting for the elevator when Marcus came through with his cart. He was reading something. This was the part that stopped her. He was walking with a cleaning cart and reading what looked like a dense financial document, following the text with one finger while he navigated the hallway entirely from memory. "What are you reading?" she asked, because she was curious by nature and hadn't yet learned not to be. He looked up, paused, folded the document, and put it in his cart. "Something for a project," he said. "What kind of project?" "The kind I do at night." She looked at him for a moment, at the document now tucked under a stack of fresh towels, at his hands, which she noticed for the first time were the hands of someone who read a lot, not someone who worked with them. "What did you do before this?" she asked. He met her eyes. Something moved in his expression, not shame, but a careful decision about how much to offer. "I ran a company," he said simply. "For a while." The elevator arrived. He wheeled his cart in. Bridget stood on the threshold. "What kind of company?" she asked. "The kind that doesn't exist anymore," he said. The doors closed. What Bridget didn't know, what she would think about for the rest of that night, was that the document she'd seen in his cart was the second version of his proposal. The one he'd been revising. The one that added 40 additional pages of data he hadn't included the first time. What neither of them knew was that upstairs, in Suite 1412, Claire Donovan was sitting at her desk with the first version in her hands, and had been, for 2 hours, and had just reached page 9 and stopped breathing for a moment. The Tuesday it broke open started the same as every other Tuesday. Marcus arrived at 7:58, signed in, collected his supplies, and took the service elevator to 15. He moved through the floor methodically, vacuuming, restocking, wiping down surfaces. He was in the conference room at 9:15, the one Patricia had joked about. He worked carefully. Patricia arrived at 9:47 and saw him through the glass wall. She opened the door. "You're still in here?" "Finishing up the window tracks," Marcus said without looking up. They were dirty. "The meeting starts at 10. "I know. I'll be done." She stood in the doorway. He was aware of her watching him. He had learned, in 14 months, how to exist inside other people's contempt without allowing it to land on him. It was a skill. He had not always had it. "You know," Patricia said, "there's a reason they have you come in at off hours. To avoid exactly this." "Noted," Marcus said. "I'm going to mention this to building management." "That's your right." She waited for him to apologize. He didn't. He finished the window track, capped the cleaning solution, and turned to leave. "Excuse me," she said as he passed, her voice dropping into something colder. "Who gave you access to this floor during business hours?" "My work order," he said. "Same one I've had for 11 months. People like you don't walk through client-facing spaces when clients are present. It's a simple professional standard." He stopped. He turned and looked at her. Not with anger, with something quieter and heavier than anger. "I'll speak to my supervisor," he said. He walked out. He heard her say something to Bridget, who had appeared in the hall, something that included the phrase "no concept of appropriate boundaries." He took the service elevator down. He sat in the supply closet on a 5-gallon bucket for 4 minutes. He breathed. He thought about Ferdinand, about sitting under the tree. Then he went back to work. What he didn't know was that Bridget had watched the whole exchange from the hallway. that she had felt something curdle in her chest, that she had gone back to her desk and sat very still for a long time, and that she had, almost without deciding to, typed an email to the executive assistant of Claire Donovan that read, "This might be nothing, but I think you should know something about the man who cleans the 15th floor." Claire Donovan called him on a Thursday. Not his work phone. She had somehow gotten his personal number, which meant someone had looked. He saw the 310 area code and almost didn't answer. He was in the school parking lot waiting for Noah. He answered. "Is this Marcus Webb?" "Yes, this is Claire Donovan. I'm the CEO of Creston Capital." "Silence, Mr. Webb. I've been sitting with your proposal for 3 weeks." Another silence. He watched Noah's class file out of the double doors across the parking lot. "Okay," he said. "I'd like to know who you are. You know who I am. I know what you submitted. I know what Bridget told my assistant. And I've spent the last 4 hours verifying something I found very difficult to believe." A pause. "You ran Aldrin Group." "I did. For 9 years." "Yes, and now you clean office buildings." "I clean your office building." He heard her take a breath. Then another one. "Why?" she asked. And it wasn't a question about logistics. It was something rawer than that. "Because my son needed me to have a job that same week," Marcus said, "and that was the one I found." Across the parking lot, Noah spotted him and started running. "I'd like to meet with you," Claire said. "In an actual meeting. With chairs." "I know where your office is," he said. "I imagine you do." And then quietly, "Mr. Webb, that proposal, the restructuring model, if you'd put your name on it, I would have called you in October." Marcus watched his son weave through the other kids, backpack bouncing, face lit up. "I know," he said. That was the point. He heard something on her end that he couldn't quite identify. A sharp exhale. Maybe the beginning of a laugh, or the end of one. "Monday," she said. 9 a.m. My office." "I'll be there," he said. "You don't need to bring the cart," she said, and hung up. He sat in the parking lot for a moment after Noah climbed in and started telling him about the caterpillar they'd found at recess. He listened. He nodded in the right places. He thought about the envelope. There had been an envelope. He had almost forgotten about it. When he submitted the proposal, he had also, on an impulse he hadn't examined closely, included a sealed personal letter addressed to the CEO, not attached to the proposal. Separate, a plain white envelope with 4, C. Donovan, "Please discard if not relevant," written on the outside. In it, he had written 3 paragraphs. The first was about Aldrin Group, what it had been, how it had ended, what he had chosen to do, and why. The second was a single line. "I am not writing to you as someone who needs a job. I'm writing to you as someone who saw a problem and knew how to solve it." The third was about Noah. He had not expected her to read it. He had not expected her to call. "Dad?" Noah said. "Are you listening?" "Every word," Marcus said. "What happened to the caterpillar? It turned into a chrysalis. Mrs. Galloway says it's not a cocoon, it's a chrysalis, and there's a difference." "She's right," Marcus said. "The caterpillar doesn't just wrap itself up. It actually dissolves. And then it rebuilds." Noah thought about this. Does it remember being a caterpillar? Marcus put the car in drive. "I think it remembers everything that mattered," he said. Friday was Marcus's last Thursday shift. He hadn't been told this yet. But by the time he arrived Monday morning in different clothes, a gray suit he'd had cleaned and pressed, the same one he'd worn to his last board meeting at Aldrin, Patricia Holt would already know. Bridget had told her. Not to be cruel. Because she was 29 and still believed in warnings. The janitor, Bridget had said, standing in Patricia's doorway, had a meeting this morning with Claire. Patricia had looked up from her screen. What kind of meeting? The kind with the senior partners. Why would Claire meet with building maintenance? He didn't come as building maintenance. Bridget paused. He came as Marcus Webb, former CEO of Aldrin Group, the person who wrote the restructuring proposal. The silence that followed was the loudest one Bridget had ever stood inside. Patricia's face went through several changes very quickly. That's not. It is. He's the yes, but he was. We saw him I know. Patricia looked down at her desk, at nothing in particular. Her expression had caved into something Bridget had never seen on it before. Not guilt exactly. Closer to the moment before guilt, when you first understand what you've been. The conference room, Patricia said, almost to herself. The Pine Sol comment. He was in the hallway when you said it, Bridget said quietly. The senior partners' meeting lasted 2 hours. Marcus presented the full restructuring model, the updated version, the one with the additional 40 pages, on a conference room screen. He wore the gray suit. He spoke the way he had always spoken in rooms like this one, without performing confidence, because confidence had never been something he performed. He answered questions directly. He said "I don't know" twice and explained what he would need to find out. When it was over, Claire walked with him to the elevator. "The letter," she said, "the personal one. I want you to know I read it." He nodded. "The part about your son," she said. "What you wrote about what you were trying to teach him. I wasn't sure if that was appropriate," Marcus said. "It wasn't," she said. "It was also the reason I stayed up until 2 a.m., confirming your employment history." The elevator arrived. He didn't move toward it. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends on you," she said. "We want to bring you on as senior restructuring advisor. It's not a CEO role. It's a consulting engagement to start. But it's real work, and it pays accordingly." "I know it's not a CEO role," he said. "I'm not sure I want one of those again for a while." Something shifted in her expression. She looked at him with an attention that felt different from the way most people looked at things they were evaluating. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. Why didn't you just apply? Send a resume? You had the credentials, the track record. Even with Aldrin's end, you could have gotten interviews." He was quiet for a moment. "Because I wanted to know if the work could speak without the name," he said. "I spent 9 years building a company on the assumption that what I built would matter more than who I was. And then it didn't. And I needed to know if that was me, or if it was just bad luck. And you called," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, nodded once. "Monday," she said. "We'll have a contract ready." He stepped into the elevator. "Mr. Webb," she said, as the doors began to close. He looked at her. For what it's worth, the work spoke very loudly. The doors closed. He stood alone in the elevator for the 4 floors down, looking at nothing, breathing slowly. He had not let himself feel it yet. What was shifting? What was returning? What had been patient enough to wait? He had learned, in 14 months, to keep those things in a separate room, to not take them out until there was space. But now, there was space. He let it in, just for those 4 floors. The consequences for Patricia Holt arrived on a Tuesday, the way most consequential things do, quietly, through proper channels, without drama. Human Resources sent her a meeting request for 2 p.m. It was flagged as confidential. She had known, from the moment Bridget told her, that this was coming. She had spent the weekend telling herself she didn't know who he was, that her comments had been misread, that professional standards applied regardless. She knew, by the time she sat across from the HR director, that none of that was going to help. The formal documentation listed 3 incidents: the conference room comment, 2 witnesses, the work order confrontation, Bridget, and a security camera. A third incident from 3 months prior that she had forgotten and was now remembering: a comment to a client in the elevator, something about getting used to a different class of people. Marcus had been behind them. She had not seen him. He had not reported it at the time. He had not reported any of it. The documentation had come from 2 people: Bridget Cole, who had submitted a voluntary account of what she'd witnessed, and Marcus himself, who had responded to HR's outreach with 3 calm paragraphs and the phrase, "I don't want this to become a larger issue." I mention it only because I think it's relevant to understanding the culture of a floor I no longer work on. Patricia's consulting contract was not renewed. The decision was described as a reorganization of responsibilities. Nobody said the word termination. Nobody needed to. She left the building on a Tuesday afternoon with a box that felt heavier than it should. She stood outside for a moment in the November air. She thought about the conference room, the Pine Sol comment, the expression on his face when she said "people like you." She thought about how she had meant it to land, and how it must have felt. She did not call Marcus to apologize. She was not sure she had earned the right. Bridget, who had applied for a position in Claire Donovan's executive office and gotten it, sent Patricia a brief email wishing her well. Patricia read it twice, did not respond. By December, Marcus had been with Creston Capital for 6 weeks. He worked from a desk on the 14th floor, not 15. He had requested a different floor, and Claire had understood without asking why. He wore a different name badge. Same building. Different elevator. He had not told Noah everything yet. He had told him, "I have a new job, buddy. It's more like the one I used to have." Noah had asked, "Do you still get to be home for dinner?" Marcus had thought about it. Most nights. "Okay," Noah had said. "That's the important part." He had a copy of the Ferdinand book on his new desk. He had bought it, his copy, not the library's. It sat next to the 2 notebooks he'd filled during the 14 months and a framed photo of Noah at 6, wearing the dinosaur pajamas, holding up a crayon drawing of the 2 of them. He had also kept the envelope, not the one he'd sent. He didn't have that anymore. But a copy he'd made of what he'd written. He kept it in the top drawer of his desk. He didn't read it often. He had mostly memorized it. The last paragraph, the one about Noah, ended like this: "My son asked me once if strength was the same as fighting. I told him no. I hope I've been honest with him. I hope, when he's old enough to understand the last 2 years, he'll see that the thing I was trying to protect wasn't my reputation, or my income, or my comfort. It was the belief that doing careful, honest work in a quiet way still means something. That it doesn't require a title to matter. That rebuilding from the bottom is still building." Claire had called him, after reading it, at 11:15 on a Thursday night. She hadn't said anything at first. Just sat on the line for a moment and breathed. "And then, I'll be honest with you, I almost didn't read it. I almost set it aside." "I know," he said. "I'm glad I didn't." "Me too," he said. Another long pause. The kind that wasn't uncomfortable. "Monday," she'd said finally. 9 a.m. "My office." "You already said that," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm saying it again." He turned his phone off that night at 8, put it in the drawer, and played 3 rounds of a card game with Noah that they had invented together and that had rules so complicated they had written them down in a small book. Noah won twice. Marcus sat on the floor of his son's room after lights out, back against the bed, listening to the sound of Noah breathing towards sleep. He had done this since Noah was born, sat in the dark, just present. He had done it in good years and bad ones, in the apartment he'd owned and the one he'd rented, in the weeks when he didn't know how he would pay for the next thing, and in this week when he did. Outside, it was raining. Inside, it was warm. He didn't know, yet, where things with Claire were going, whether they were going anywhere at all beyond the professional, whether he was reading something into long phone calls and careful attention that wasn't there to be read. He wasn't in a hurry to find out. He had learned, recently and with difficulty, that things rebuilt at the right pace tend to be stronger than things rushed. He just sat there, listening to his son breathe, a caterpillar that had dissolved, and was, careful piece by careful piece, becoming something new. End.